All right, so most of our hormones are going to have some effect on metabolism. So we'll just kind of briefly talk about those things, the way that metabolism works with our different nutrient sources. And I'll let you read more about it. We'll talk about it again in the digestive system. But as far as glucose metabolism goes, then we can do a couple things with glucose. We can do gluconeogenesis, which is, if we break this word down, glucose, neo means new, genesis. So this is how we're going to make glucose from non-carbohydrate substrates. So we're going to make new glucose. The liver can do this, and so, like I said, cortisol is one of these hormones that will stimulate breakdown of skeletal muscle protein. So then the liver has to take that protein and convert it to glucose. So use gluconeogenesis to do that. We can also use fats for gluconeogenesis. Mm-hmm.
So when it breaks down the skeletal muscle, how do you build that skeletal muscle back to say like
Oh, because you can just add more proteins to it. So it's not actually destroying the muscle fibers, it's just taking proteins out of the fibers.
Okay.
So, but it is detrimental, definitely. So gluconeogenesis is when we'll make glucose from non-carbohydrate substrates. The liver does this. Now, if we have lots of glucose and we want to store it, then we can store it as glycogen. So glycogenesis is when we store excess glucose as glycogen. So a hormone that can stimulate glycogenesis would be insulin. If we've got a lot of blood glucose around, insulin can stimulate all of the cells in the body to uptake that glucose, but it can also stimulate the liver and, to a lesser degree, skeletal muscle to take that excess glucose and store it as glycogen. The last thing that we can do in times of nutrient deprivation or between meals, we can break down that stored glycogen and use it as glucose. So that's called glycogenolysis. So this is when we break down glucose or break down glycogen to give us glucose. So a hormone that will stimulate glycogenolysis is glucagon. Your blood sugar goes low in between meals, you need some extra glucose, then glucagon will stimulate the liver to undergo glycogenolysis and will break down that stored glycogen to give us glucose.
So it happens in the liver again.
Yeah, in the liver and then the skeletal. The skeletal muscle not really so much for glycogenolysis, because the skeletal muscles are going to use that glycogen as excess stores for themselves, because they're such glucose hogs. All right. Are we good on that? Okay, so for our lipids, if we're in a state of like nutrient excess, then we can do lipogenesis, which is basically you're stimulating your adipose cells to increase their fat content. So we'll say lipogenesis is the production of lipids. So a hormone that would stimulate lipogenesis would be insulin again. So we're high in glucose, we're high in nutrients, then we can use that glucose to fuel the production of lipids in our adipose cells. Insulin is a storage hormone, so that's what it's going to do. If you've got a lot of insulin around, it'll cause your cells to store whatever they can. Then the opposite of this is lipolysis, which is the breakdown of lipids. Growth hormone is a great hormone for lipolysis. Growth hormone is like what every dieter wishes could happen. Like you wish that you could just have growth hormone because it stimulates the breakdown of fats and it stimulates the production of protein, which is what you want when you're dieting. You want to be able to decrease your fat content and, of course, with exercise, increase your protein. So growth hormone is going to be one that can stimulate lipolysis. So the target of both lipogenesis and lipolysis are going to be our adipose cells. For lipogenesis, we'll increase the size of our adipose cells. For lipolysis, we would break them down. Thyroid hormone is going to be another one that can stimulate lipolysis, especially when glucose or growth hormone is around. All right, so for protein metabolism, we have protein synthesis or protein anabolism. So anabolism is protein synthesis. And growth hormone is going to be one that can stimulate protein anabolism. For protein breakdown, we would call that catabolism. And this would be like cortisol. When you've got a bunch of cortisol present, it's easier to get glucose from protein through gluconeogenesis than it is to get glucose from fat. So when cortisol is on board, it'll stimulate protein catabolism or protein breakdown. All right, questions so far?
So when cortisol is not present, but in like a starvation phase, is the main source of energy from fat or protein?
So at first you would have cortisol present because that's a stressful situation. So the first thing to be broken down is protein, but then after a couple days you'll start breaking down fat. That's what we have fat for, is for times of extreme nutrient deprivation. So you have to go into like your third day of total nutrient deprivation to make the switch. Or like the Atkins diet is trying to trick the body into thinking that you're starving by totally like cutting out carbohydrates. Since carbohydrates is what all of the cells of the body use for energy, if you totally deprive yourself of carbohydrates, you can actually do what's called the metabolic shift. And in that case, you would break down fat first. Because you can't, if you're going to be starving, you can't break down all your proteins. It would be detrimental to the system. So, good question. Did I answer your question?
Yes.
Okay. Any other questions? All right, so your book kind of uses growth hormone as this example of how we regulate and activate it. So, and the actions of growth hormone. So, we'll start there. So, growth hormone. The stimulus for growth hormone releasing hormone is going to be age. So the two things that are affecting this system are growth hormone releasing hormone and growth hormone release inhibiting hormone, or somatostatin. So if we look at the pathway, then the things that are going to affect growth hormone releasing hormone release, well, both of these things at all are age, time of day, state of nutrients, so nutrient level. And again, throughout the day, you can have both hormones present, but our somatotropes are going to be inhibited throughout most of the day because somatostatin wins out, basically. So these are our somatotropes. And what does growth hormone do? So at night, growth hormone, release inhibiting hormone, is inhibited by melatonin. So we'll have growth hormone releasing hormone combined, and we'll release growth hormone. So what does growth hormone do? It's going to, if we look at our targets or what it's doing with metabolism, it would increase protein anabolism. It will increase lipolysis. What else is it going to do? Those are the biggest effects. It's going to increase protein anabolism all over the body, especially in skeletal muscles. You'll increase lipolysis. You're burning the fat so that you can use that to fuel all this protein anabolism that's going on. So that's mostly what I want you to know about that. As far as the variables that influence growth hormone levels, just look at this figure in your book. It kind of is telling you the details of all of this stimulus stuff. So have a look at it, but it's not something that I'm going to test you in great detail on. What you'll see is that it shows that like your age, growth hormone levels go down significantly after adolescence. They're really high in childhood. So you can just look at that in your book.